Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Stars Like Us. I am your host, Aliza Kelly, and today I am with Case Kenny, the Chicago-based host of the Apple Podcast Top 100 New Mindset Who Dis. What an amazing accomplishment, as well as a recording artist, DJ, and producer creating dance music guided meditations. Case is also the creator of best-selling Mindfulness Journal, the New Mindset Journal, the Dating Workbook, Single is Your Superpower, and the Anti-Anxiety Journal, Unbothered. We also just did Case's chart. And even though I am not going to work with an ambiguous time of birth, we know that Case is an Aries Sun with a Scorpio moon. Actually, I'm not sure if you have a Scorpio moon. It's possible that you have a Sagittarius moon because we don't know your time of birth. We don't know. But we still have a lot to work with. I'm so excited to have you on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to dig into that. I should have done some research. I should have texted my mom to get the exact time, but hopefully.
Yeah, moms always appreciate a time of birth text. No question
Right?
about it.
Of
Yes.
course. Yeah.
So my first question for you is with so much of your brand being around new mindset, who dis, what was the old mindset?
Oh, yeah, it's a good question. I assume it was, old mindset who dis. I mean, it was one that just lacked self-awareness. Everything I do on the podcast, even though I tend to talk a lot about dating, is broader. It's all about mindfulness, and all mindfulness is, in my opinion, is self-awareness. And I think it took for me in my life, I'm 33 now, just kind of a mental mindset reset to be more self-aware of every aspect of my life. That's why am I doing what I'm doing? Why do I have the goals that I have? Are they even my goals? Are they other people's goals? Am I living the life that's true to me? Or am I living a life that's true to other people and I'm borrowing their truths? I don't really know. So like the past 5 years have been just a lot of introspection, a lot of reset, a lot of just, I would just say ownership of my mindset and my intention.
And I mean, from an astrological perspective, that would completely align with your Saturn return, which starts for you. It was at the beginning or at the end of 2017, beginning of 2018. It is from an astrological point of view, this is like when we become our own person. It is when we differentiate self from other. It is when we start to be able to have autonomy. For the first 29 years of our life, we are very much in the state of reaction. We are responding to the life and to the circumstances and to our family and to society and blah, 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 blah. And then on the other side of Saturn return, we're like, no, this is actually who I am. I'm going to step into this. I'm going to show up. It's amazing. Like, generally speaking, most people are kind of forced to answer that call because it's just, there's not really a way around it. But some people still resist it into their 30s and then move into their 30s, still sort of like, not taking the time to create that alignment between what you actually want and what circumstances are happening in your reality. So I'm curious, especially since you didn't know, or I'm assuming you had limited knowledge about your Saturn return, what was it for you that catalyzed that interest in self-awareness?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. It was when I was 29, late 29. I had been in a relationship for about 3 years prior, lived together, the whole thing. And also at the time, I was very invested in my job that I had at the time, a job in sales. So I was very invested in my career, very invested in the relationship, which I think was appropriate. But then the relationship ended and I kind of hopped out of that. And I was like, wow, with that part of my life not being such a defining factor anymore, like who am I? What are my goals? What am I about? Like, what kind of not selfish but like self-focused efforts should I be striving for? Because it seemed everything else was focused on success in the career, girlfriend, things like that. Hopped out of that and I was just like, who am I? And that was kind of the catalyst. There wasn't some like life altering moment. I just think coming out of that relationship, which ended rather quickly, and then looking at my job at the time, I was like, just what am I doing? And I started the podcast as a result. I was like, what's a way? I've always written online. I've always been an online, business owner and entrepreneur. But I was like, what's a way that I can challenge myself, to push myself, to ask myself these questions? And I was like, well, podcasting. It's a way to be really vulnerable vulnerable and real. It's easy to hide behind words that you write online. You could edit it and edit it and edit it. What's something that I could do to like really push myself to do that? And I was like, podcasting. So I just started to do that and ask myself these questions live on the air, on the podcast. And it's been really good. I always say that podcast for me is like my own form of therapy. And obviously it helps other people at the same time. So it's a win-win. And I've been doing it for 3 years ever since.
So so I totally understand, like, where am I, what's going on, who am I doing this for, what are my goals? Like, is there something deeper? Is there a sort of a more universal truth that creates the through line for my life and the choices that I'm making? But I'm curious as to how, like, mindfulness and spirituality, I don't know if you would define it as spirituality, but I would define it as spirituality, how that became a component of the work. Was that something that you were always sort of curious about? Is that something that was that the questions kind of facilitated, or was there already a foundation for that thought?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of what I was looking for. I think previously, like all of what you just referenced for me went hand in hand with like a search for fulfillment, a search for purpose. And I think prior to kind of that being the catalyst, I was like many people, like borrowing definitions of fulfillment and purpose from other people, simply because I didn't really know, right? Fulfillment in life for me is having a good job, having a healthy relationship. That's fulfillment. That means that my purpose on earth has been fulfilled. I'm not messing up. I'm not missing out. I'm doing the right things. And that was kind of always my MO. Like, I got to work harder at this job because success is the proof that, you're on earth for a reason. Oh, you got to, have a healthy relationship and a girlfriend who supports you and you supports them. That's great. That means that you're lovable and you're able to love. That's fantastic. And in my mind, those were like definitions of fulfillment. And I think coming out of that relationship and taking a look at my job, I was like, yeah, those are all well and good, but like I didn't define those for myself through trial and error, through introspection, through a more spiritual, deep-seated level. And I popped out and I was like, I really needed to find those for myself. And if it turns out that those are the same things that are important to me, that's great. But I need to get my hands dirty. I need to be first person in my life instead of borrowing these from other people. And it was kind of just like that little catalyst. I was like, but mostly it was what is my purpose? Like there's got to be a reason why I'm on earth. Like it can't just be to do these things and that's all well and good. Like I think I always had this inclination. My parents always really encouraged me creatively that everyone's been given some kind of special skill in life. And I think I was stuck on this idea that it has to be super tangible. Like, oh, you got to be a great singer, a great athlete, a great business person. I'm like, well, I'm not really any of those things. So what's a guy to do? So I think it went hand in hand with really tapping into like, what is my skill in life? And that aligned me with fulfillment and purpose. And then that led to everything else, which is just like centeredness and confidence and just like more mindfulness. Now I look at everything through the lens of, is this honoring my ability to be impactful? Is this honoring the intention that I have in life in general? So it's kind of all goes hand in hand. But yeah, I think it was really that search for like personalized fulfillment for myself.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, and obviously, if I am wrong here, you can correct me. But from my vantage, it seems like you are a straight white male, right? I am thinking.
Right.
I don't know what it's like to be in your position, and I don't know what it's like to have to grow up with the kind of stresses and responsibilities that somebody in your demographic in society has. But from my understanding, or at least from the way that I have sort of like, moved through the world in these 31 years that I have been alive, I definitely have noticed that men, or our concept of what it means to be a man, boy to man, does not come with the same kind of emotional tools that I think that women are offered, and that women are also told that it's okay for us to seek. Did you find that to be a truth in your process as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not one to really buy into like broad spread cliches and things, but I mean, it is true. I mean, like the sensitivity tools in a man's arsenal are seriously diminished compared to a woman, just naturally how men are conditioned to think and act and perceive themselves. There's absolute truth to that, whether you call it, men aren't willing to be as vulnerable, emotional, sensitive, whatever you want to call it. Absolutely. I look back and I'm like, wow, I was very closed off. Not because I necessarily thought that that wasn't being masculine, but it was just like happened, when
Mm-hmm.
you are raised and you grow up as a man or as a person or whoever. Like I found that to be true. And, I've leaned very much so now into this idea of, being sensitive as a superpower, but it being balanced by the great things about being a man, about, having some of that bravado and some of that like ego and some of those things. It's about balance. And I think before, I saw, a definition of a confident case was one where the scales were very tipped towards the end of ego. And now I'm just so bought into, holistic mindfulness, which is very inclusive of being as vulnerable as possible. And vulnerability is something that I think scares a lot of people off. I just think vulnerability is honesty. I think radical honesty, radical candor is the greatest thing in a man or a woman. And I think I've just redefined that for myself, and helped redefine that for some other people. And it's just, maybe this would have happened normally just through growth. I think every man or woman, as you get into your 30s and later, you realize that you were kind of silly in your 20s and you overlooked a lot of things that you possess that are great and powerful. But I think pushing myself to be more mindful ultimately led me here much quicker. And now I'm a big evangelist for it, obviously.
So then this leads me into like where we're really going to have some fun, which is that you told my assistant who helped schedule this podcast that you didn't know your big three, your sun, moon, and rising. We put in the information that we have. You definitely should have texted your mom, but that's okay. We'll make do with what we have. But I'm curious about, from your perspective, and now I want that radical fucking honesty. Like, how do you perceive astrology? What do you think about astrology as people who practice astrology, the astrology moves, in whatever dimension it has come to you and you have received it? Like, what are your thoughts from your perspective on it?
Yeah, love it. Yeah, full honesty, I think I'm curious about it. I respect anyone who is really into it or only a little bit into it. I think if we're being totally honest, I think in my past, I am in the self-help space, which like I'm very cynical towards, which is funny because I host a very popular podcast and have all these things. And I am by definition a self-help person. But I think I'm cynical towards a lot of elements of it, some of which are just cliches and things like that. And my reaction to astrology has always been, a sense of questioning when people place so much like onus on the decisions that they make or the people in their lives as a direct result of astrology and signs and things of that nature. And, as someone who knows nothing about it, I try to be very open-minded to be like, I'm sure there's cause and effect. I'm sure there's patterns. Absolutely. I've just always been hesitant to hop on board a, cause and effect type train where people, I don't want to say blame, or where people, place so much weight of signs, whether it's themselves or their partner or the way that, they're feeling or something like that on that. But like, that's always the way it's always been. So it's been, cautious optimism towards it without knowing anything about it. But I always try to stay open-minded and sensitive to the fact that, there's much more than I'm aware of and that I know. So I'd love to learn more.
Well, it's interesting because my audience, I think, oscillates between 89 and 90% female. it's like, yeah, I mean, there's just not a lot of there. And I have read charts for thousands of people over my years as an astrologer. And I would say that of those thousand, the male clients that have sought me out independently from their girlfriend or wife buying them a session is probably under 50. So it's, it's just, it's kind of like chilling in a way.
That's crazy.
It is. It's really crazy. Yeah. And it's a shame, I honestly think, because the work of astrology is so much more sophisticated, so much more thoughtful. It's such an amazing language set for understanding self, understanding other, being able to open up conversations about what I think one of the most challenging things is multidimensionality. Especially I know that a big topic that you cover is the topic of dating. And in astrology, there's, archetypes and there's definitions for the fact that we might say that we want things that are actually different than our needs, like, and we have a language set for that in astrology, which is one of the reasons I think that it's such a remarkable, such an incredible tool. But the numbers don't lie, it doesn't, there's no question that the majority of people, at least who have come into my orbit, no pun intended, that are interested in astrology are predominantly, like vast majority, female. Why do you think, speaking on behalf of literally all men in the entire world, which is a totally normal thing to do, why do you think that is the case?
It's a good question. I don't know. I think even with you saying that, I was like, why I try digging into like my own hesitancy, call it. I think maybe it's like a unwillingness to like relinquish some control, like from a male's perspective, like again, I'm so unfamiliar with the practice and the study. I think my reaction would be if I'm told something about my sign or, a connectivity with another person, I would be like, well, it sounds like I don't, have 100% control over that. There's things that I'm inclined to do that is just the way I'm wired. And I don't like that. So it could be a control thing. It could be an ego thing at a glance. And obviously that goes hand in hand with some of the lesser great elements of masculinity, possibly. That would be my first guess. But I will say, to your point, my audience is 88% female, at least just based on Instagram. So it's all women. So I've learned so much, and that's why like I'm genuinely, not just saying it, like eager to learn, because yeah, I'm curious as well. It's like my listenership is women, and they're very into that kind of thing. But I think my hesitancy has come from conversations I've had where, a woman would be like, I met this guy, but then I learned his sign was so-and-so. And like, that makes it complicated. And to me, I hear things like that. I'm like, we're just going to dismiss a person based on a sign or something that we've studied. Like, I'd love to like understand where that comes from, and how to make appropriate decisions based on insight gleaned from those kinds of things. But to answer your original question, I think it's probably a hesitancy to relinquish control or to own that creative process in your life completely.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because prior to the 60s and 70s, astrology, like so many other things, was really like a tool for dudes. It was like a guy's thing. Huh. And then in the 60s and 70s, there were a lot of female astrologers who published books, and there was obviously a lot of revolution and innovation going on at that time. And it started to be marketed towards women. And I think that there is just this natural, like, women like astrology, we market towards women, we don't market towards men, even though the fucking US Army just did an astrology meme, which was like one of the weirdest things I have ever experienced and encountered in my life, seeing that, where I'm like, what dystopian nightmare am I existing in right now? Yes, I mean, I think I want to actually, just before we talk about your chart, I want to ask you a question about having the same demographics as your following, but not being of your same demographic of your following. Why do you think it is that you have a majority female audience? And are you interested in trying to get more men on board? Are we giving up on the dudes? Like, how should, because we really do need to help the dudes, we got to help the dudes. They don't really want to listen to me, but maybe they'll listen to you, but maybe they don't want to listen to you because they're not listening. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I can't give up on my fellas. I don't know. I mean, I think it's just like I grew my following quickly over the past 2 years. And I think it's just that women are more receptive to the things I talk about. I mean, I'm literally just sharing my feelings all day, every day. Like, it's a somewhat vulnerable, honestly, sometimes cringy thing to do. And I think women just appreciate that more. And I don't know, I play into it. I'm, somewhat average dude who shares his feelings and does these things, and it's attractive to some women. And that's great. And I lean into that. But I mean, honestly, I think it's just kind of that dichotomy of being a straight white male who's willing to talk about these things in a somewhat non-fuckboy fashion that I think is like, is really appealing. Plus also, like, I formerly never did dating content. It was just strictly mindfulness because I thought I was woefully unqualified to give dating advice. I still think I am. I still think it's the funniest thing in the world that I do this. But when I started to do that, I think, women or anyone really, a average guy, not an expert, not a guru, not a coach, is giving advice on dating. That's cool. Maybe I could learn something from this because it's relatable. And then I think women like getting the flip side of the equation. What is a man thinking? That kind of thing. But ultimately, I genuinely genuinely think it's a immediate receptiveness to more of the vulnerable thoughts I have. That 12% of men who listen, though, they dig it. I just think, yeah, it's getting your foot in the door and like removing that barrier to entry and that friction. Yeah, I'd love to have more men on board, but here we are.
Follow-up question. Who is Joe Rogan? Do you know who this person is? Because it seems like that's where the men want to go.
I mean, I listened to his podcast before. Like, I don't listen.
Who is he?
I don't listen to him because I think he's some icon. I listen to him because his guests are interesting.
Is that who he is? He's someone who has good guests?
By my definition, yes. I'm not really interested. No disrespect to him. I'm not really interested in his opinions because they're very slanted and skewed, and he pushes his own agenda. But yeah, I like that he has good conversations. But that's it. Like men are obsessed with him, and
again, I'm sorry to do this to you. I know you cannot speak for all men, but just within the container of this podcast, if you happen to know who Joe Rogan is and why dudes are listening to him, any information would be greatly appreciated, because it is one of those things where I'm like, this guy, like him, really him? I understand when guys are listening to like entrepreneurs. Like I even understand Elon Musk. I get it. Like Elon Musk is modern day Batman. Makes sense. But Joe Rogan is just one of those where I'm like, who is he? I don't know. Yeah. But guys seem to like it. And, if maybe some of the guys who are listening to Joe Rogan want to hang out with mindfulness practitioners and astrologers, like we might live in a even better world. Maybe.
Yeah. Just need a little bit more balance. I mean, I think I'd have to look back and like really dig into Joe. But I mean, I think men are attracted to him because he's a man's man. He likes hunting and steak and drinking and cigars and smoking, and he talks to other manly men, and it's great. That's why I listen. Like when I want a dose of masculinity and interesting conversations with people who are in the top of their field, I tune in. And I think it's just spread how anything viral spreads. People are interested in things that other people are interested in, and it's become the narrative that men like Joe Rogan. So if you're a man and you want to be interested in something, it's an easy default. And voila.
So, on the topic of masculinity, it's actually something that's really important in your birth chart. I don't know if you know anything about being an Aries, but it is the first sign of the zodiac. It's a fire sign, and it's actually the spark that gets the entire system going. It is associated with sort of like raw, like untethered, unabashed, unapologetic energy. And a lot of the time that looks, at least in a lot of the sort of archetypes that we work with, as sort of like raw masculinity. And obviously for all of my like lovely female Aries listeners, it doesn't mean that you have higher levels of testosterone if you don't want them. It's simply like there is that sort of like intensity associated with Aries that is often associated with more traditional masculine energy. And that's your sun sign. That's how you exude. That's what makes you happy. That's what brings you joy. That's what the sun represents. So being able to maintain sort of like that sense of self while still adding the dimensionality and the layers and the honesty and the authenticity and the vulnerability and the genuinity to your work, I think actually really is you living your sun sign. Because obviously, your chart, even though we can't see what all of the different placements are until you text your mom, we know that you have, just like everyone else, you have all of the zodiac signs in your chart. You have all of the different planets that all mean different things. It's possible that you have a Scorpio moon, which is your internal world being super intense, super emotional, super intuitive, or you might have a Sagittarius moon, in which case your emotional world is all about philosophy and learning and exploring and expanding. Either way, it's different ways of expressing your sort of external solar energy and then your internal lunar energy. And gender aside, like everybody has all of these dynamics and all of these components to them. But I do think that telling, I think that it's your mission. I'm offering you a mission, which is to get men to listen to mindfulness and to get them to since you could understand what the psychology is, to try to bring them into being more thoughtful, because I want to have more male clients. I want to talk about this with guys. And it's not that I don't love the clients and the people that are listening. It's just that these are tools for self-actualization. These are tools to get better, to become a better person, to be a better, to show up as a more authentic version of self, and then to show up interpersonally as a more kind, compassionate, honest, boundary-based human being, which is really what the name of the game is. And I think that it's your mission to go and do that.
I agree. I agree. I mean, that fires me up. I love that. And I think you're so right. And I think about that too. It's like, how can we like simplify the pitch for men? Because I think sometimes that's what it is. Men have preconceived notions about all these things. And I think a lot about this, like simplifying the pitch for mindfulness, simplifying the pitch for sensitivity compounded with healthy ego. And I think about it and I think it's like, if you can give yourself, like, I think about it like, it doesn't feel good to live a life that's inauthentic. Men, women, it doesn't feel good. It feels discontent. It feels uncomfortable because you have something that's not true to you, or you're faking it, or you're doing something that doesn't sit right to you. And it's like the pitch I've always given for men is like, be mindful because it feels good. Like it feels good to be truthful and honest to yourself. And even if it results in awkwardness or embarrassment or something, like I'll take that any day of the week than living a life where I'm just uncomfortable. And that's like that. I try to position it in the realm of like, do something that's selfish for you. Like
Aries, perfectly
fix your
Aries.
shit.
Aries, the statement of Aries is I am. Selfishness is actually an important, like essential part of your zodiac sign. And I don't mean that in a like slanderous way. I mean that in like that's your superpower. Like and then to advocate that and to help people be more I am, for that to be the affirmation, for that to be the sort of like for that to be the common denominator, I think is really powerful.
I love that. That gives me an episode idea. Be more I am. Yeah, I think that's powerful because
make sure you credit me, Case.
People, I absolutely will. I absolutely will. That's great. Thank you.
I have a few questions for you now. My first question is, what do you believe in?
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier. I believe in the power of creation. I think everyone has the ability to create something in their life from scratch. Not necessarily entrepreneurship or business or even content creators, although that's where I tend to skew. I think everyone has a story worth sharing, but I really do believe that everyone has the ability to create something. And that could take all kinds of different shapes and forms. It could be as simple as volunteering. You're creating an emotional connection. You're giving away time, resources, feelings, whatever it may be. But like back to the talent comment, like I used to think I was like talentless. I used to think I didn't have the ability to create, but I've really tapped into that ability just by really leaning into what makes me true. People always ask me, well, what is your talent? And I was like, well, it's the most random, obscure talent in the world. But I'd say my talent is the ability to simplify things, specifically emotions, understanding of life, relationships, things like that. You would never see that on a list of top 100 talents. That is just not a talent. But I think everyone has something like that can give them purpose in life. So that is what I believe in, that everyone has the ability to sit down, figure out what it is, and then allow it to lead them to some type of action in life that I think could be really, really, really fulfilling.
Mm-hmm. Why did you think that you were talentless?
Yeah, that sounds more dark than it is. I just think
but even if it is dark, like dark or not dark, I'm not afraid of dark shit.
Yeah. Well, I just think because to my point, I was borrowing other people's definitions of talents and success and happiness. Like I used to think, oh, if you're a single dude in your late 20s, here's what being a single dude in your late 20s looks like. Here's what being a happy single dude in your 20s looks like. It looks like having a roster, looks like bottles at the clubs. It looks like being a fuck boy because that's what all the memes glorify. That's what it looks like. What does it look like to be successful? Well, obviously Forbes 30 under 30, 500K a year, whatever, like all these preconceived notions. And the same with happiness. Oh, happiness means having, 30 friends, brunch every Saturday, boozy, like all these things. Like that is the definition of happiness, success, fulfillment, whatever. And some of those are true, but not all of them until I defined it for myself through just literal trial and error. That's all it was.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, that Forbes 30 under 30, man, that really fucks with your head. Like I remember it's crazy how much weight that pulls and how much like on that for sort of setting these expectations and these standards, you know, like it's interesting. I don't think it's specifically Forbes. I think that Forbes 30 under 30 is the symbol of that kind of pressure of you need to have your life figured out by the time you're 30. And if you don't, you're fucked.
Yeah.
Like, which is like the irony is that from an astrological perspective, anything that you start in your 20s is going to collapse. I mean, for the listeners, like, don't come for me, but like before your Saturn return, like, don't get married. Don't like have a business that you think is going to be the thing that you do forever and not pivot. Like, don't make these commitments to what you think your future is going to be before your Saturn return, before you're 29. So interestingly, it's kind of the antithesis of Forbes 30 under 30, because it's like, experiment in your 20s as much as possible, because in your 30s is when things start to actually get solidified.
They should make it the Forbes 30 over 30. Yeah. I mean, yeah, totally. It's so funny because like somehow ended up in this role where I'm giving advice, and I try to answer as many DMs and things like that. And I always get people, telling me how, frustrated and sad and lost they are in life. And I sit there and I empathize and I ask questions, and I'm like, oh, wait, quick question. How old are you? They're like, I'm 23. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Like, I never thought I'd be that guy being like, you're so young. But like, there's so much truth to like the revolutions you go through when you're 22, 25, 27, 29, 33. Like, we need, like, I think life's about balance. It's about being incredibly patient, but also having a sense of urgency to learn, not to get it right, but to learn, hit reset, move forward, learn, reset, move forward. And age does nothing but get us in trouble when we start putting timelines on ourselves. So.
But the interesting thing is that for any listeners who are in their 20s right now, they're like, oh, whatever. Like, I actually get it. Like, they're bullshitting. Yeah. Like, I know what it's like, because you actually need to get to the other side of it in order to understand it. It's not something that you can like be like, maybe these 30 something year olds are right. Like, no, when you're in your 20s, you feel this immense pressure to be successful and to have everything figured out, that really just by the time you enter your 30s and you actually start a new decade over again, you're like, oh my God, I'm kind of young again. Ironically, like it's so liberating. It's so freeing. It's so inspiring, because you feel like the world is your oyster.
Yeah, I agree. I love getting older.
Me too. It's my favorite thing so far. So I would like to pull a tarot card for you.
Great.
And I would love for you to, I mean, there's two options. There's one that I would hopefully, I want to direct you towards, which is the first, which is, if you have a question or something that you would like to ask about, I can, even if you don't have like the exact wording for it, I can help you come up with the wording for it, or I could just pull a card and we could see what comes up. But I really would prefer the first one.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Just any question, vague, specific. I'd say like, for me, I'm jumbling a lot of purpose-driven ideas right now. So the question that I'm kind of jumping around in my head is like, what's next for me? Like, what should my focus be next in my life, creative, relationships, everything?
This is so funny because yesterday I was with a friend of mine and she brought a deck of cards, and I asked the exact same question.
There you go.
So I say, I have something I say, which is called tank, which means there are no coincidences. And I would say that was a tank moment. Okay. So from what I understand, because I like to make sure I get the question, because obviously all of this is communication based. What's the best place for you to be focusing your energy? You have a lot of energy and it's going into different pursuits, but at this moment, on this Monday, what is the best vessel for your energy? Am I understanding that right?
Spot on. Yep. Okay,
cool. Let us see what it is. The Chariot, which is the Cancer card. So first question, I know that you don't know a lot about astrology, but was it anyone's birthday recently that's important to you, or upcoming in the next 2 weeks that is important to you? Cancer season currently.
Recently, there was a birthday like 2 days ago, if that counts.
Yes. Would you share with me whose birthday it was?
It was my dad's birthday.
Oh, okay, cool. So that's what this card is. This card is about your father, your family, your relationship with like those extensions in your life. We're in Cancer season currently, and this card, whenever I see it, it's really a person to me. So that's why I always like to ask, who's the Cancer in your life? it is, oh, there it is. Wow, beautiful, coming into focus. So this guy, what is really interesting is that here's a guy who is spiritually connected. He's in his chariot, so he's like fully armored, and he is protected in this beautiful celestial enclosure. He's obviously ready for battle, but he's also connecting to the Cancerian energy of doing it from the heart. So there's a lot of intuitive, emotional energy surrounding this, even though we're coming into the situation a little bit guarded. We are coming in with our armor on. We're ready for battle. We also are feeling protected. So maybe this is what I'm getting from this. I wonder how, when we talk about like you being the ambassador for men, I wonder if patient zero is your father.
Oh, yeah. Very possible.
So maybe that is where to focus energy, is figuring out how, if I were to try to get my father on board with this, what would I need to say and explain and do in order for him to really understand how to embody this kind of work.
I love that. Yeah, that's great. Okay, cool.
My last question for you is, how does magic show up in your life?
Oh man, great question. I think magic in my life has been a direct result of stubbornness. Like I have just found that the more healthy stubbornness, not like sticking out a toxic relationship or something like that. Talking about healthy stubbornness, dedication to something, just inevitably has led to a moment of magical breakthrough. A moment where the graph is like that, and then it's all of a sudden like that, even if it's 3 years after you started your stubbornness journey, whether that's fitness, a dedication to developing confidence, a creative outlet, my business. Like I've just found so many magical breakthroughs have been the result of leaning into my stubbornness, because I've always been incredibly stubborn.
You're like, that's a skill.
I think so. I just refuse to quit. And it's not because like I always want to win. It's just because I'm too stubborn to stop.
Well, do you know that another thing with Aries is that they are the most competitive sign of the zodiac?
I mean, makes sense.
Yeah. Aries need to win. That's like the mission of Aries. And I am saying this as like an Aries ambassador. My fiance is an Aries. I love Aries. My grandfather was an Aries. I love Aries energy. It's like, it's so inspiring to me. But yeah, it's extremely competitive. It's like, I have to be the best. I have to win, and nothing's going to stop me.
Yeah. Well, there you go. It seems very true in my life. And I'd say magic can come from that.
Yes. So go forth and text your mom to get your birth time so we could really do your full chart. But until then, where can our listeners find you and connect with you and continue to learn your wisdom?
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. This was super, super interesting. Like very different from any other interview I've done. So I appreciate that so much. Super easy. Case.Kenny on Instagram. Podcast is called New Mindset Who Dis, and then newmindsetwhodis.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.